It's amazing how one choice, one decision, one phone call, and our whole world can change forever. And gave the doctor a big hug as a 11-month-old, still trying to learn how to walk, because I was hugging him and he felt my stomach and thought, geez, that doesn't feel right. That night I was airlifted to Sydney Hospital, and the following morning I was diagnosed with an incurable cancer of the central nervous system called Neuroblastoma stage 4. Doctors said there was no chance of survival to take me home and allow me to live the next few months with my family, because there was nothing that they can do. I was on a trial drug. They trialed on 25 people around the world, and unfortunately 24 of them tragically passed away. I was the only survivor. So it's not the adversity in our life that defines us, it's how we deal with it. And there was one lady on a phone down the front. I was getting so frustrated, so much so that I was skipping parts of my presentation just to hurry up and get to the end, because I thought, well, if she's not listening, then no one's listening, right? Then at the end, I'd finished and I was signing books, but that one woman that was disconnected was in the line. And I was like, why does she want to buy a book? Like, she wasn't even listening to what I had to say. And then I thought, I know why she wanted to buy a book, to work out what I actually said on stage, right? Because you didn't hear a word that I said. And she showed me a phone. I was looking at a photo of my 6-year-old daughter who died from the exact same cancer that you died from. And it made me realize so quickly, and I'm sorry I get so emotional, but I'm a man that wears my heart on my sleeve, that everyone's going through something.
Welcome to Beyond the Keynote podcast. I am absolutely honoured and so excited today to speak to Michael Crossland, a fellow Aussie, which is always nice because we get to speak at a decent time, an hour. Welcome, Michael. So great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for the invite. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Now, I would love to hear all about you and your childhood growing up. First of all, the reason why I asked that question is because I think that everything that's happened in your life really shapes you as a speaker, and obviously also gives you all the stories you can draw on and lessons you can share with audiences to help them not make the same mistakes potentially as you, and to inspire them to be their best self. So do you want to take us through from early childhood, your story growing up?
Yeah, I agree with you. Storytelling has certainly been what has enabled me to do what I do and do what I love doing. And for me, it all started as a 11-month-old boy. I had 3 older sisters. We lived out on a farm. From the outside looking in, everything was amazing. You know, we had our health, we had our family, we had our happiness. And it's amazing how one choice, one decision, one phone call, and our whole world can change forever. And for me, it was my sister had an ear infection. And that was when everything for me changed. I went to the doctors with my mum and my sister. She was getting all her tests done. And as we were leaving, I gave the doctor a big hug as a 11-month-old, still trying to learn how to walk. And my stomach ran into his knee as I was hugging him, and he felt my stomach and thought, geez, that doesn't feel right. I was taken to Coffs Harbour Hospital. That night I was airlifted to Sydney Hospital. And the following morning, I was diagnosed with an incurable cancer of the central nervous system called Neuroblastoma stage 4.
Oh my goodness.
Doctors said there was no chance of survival to take me home and allow me to live the next few months with my family, because there was nothing that they can do. But as you know, life is all about choices, and my mum chose to ask one question. I don't want to know what the chances are of my son dying is. I want to know what the chances are of my son surviving is.
Amazing.
And they said I had a 96% death rate, and my mum chose to look at my life being 4% full. And 3 days later, I started chemotherapy, and my chemo cycle was 9 days on and 3 days off for the next 4.5 years. And as you know, during that period, I was on a trial drug. They trialed on 25 people around the world, and unfortunately 24 of them tragically passed away. And I was the only survivor. So I think, to your point, it certainly molded me into the man I am today, but it also has made me realize that it's not the adversity in our life that defines us, it's how we deal with it. And I think that yourself and everybody listening, we all have a story, we all have a story to tell. And I think that when we don't allow the darkness of our world to define us, but rather utilize that darkness as a motivation to succeed, then I think that allows us to lead and live a remarkable life that enables us the opportunity to have great impact. And off the back of that drug, they no longer use it, because I was burnt from head to toe. What they would do to try and keep me alive is they would wrap me up in bandages and they'd lie me in baths full of ice, trying to prevent my brain from frying. But
my goodness.
it taught me so much about resilience. It taught me so much about courage, but more importantly than that, it taught me so much about the fact that it's so much easier lying in the bed than standing next to it. I understand now that my mum felt far greater pain and far greater suffering, both I think physically and mentally, than what I did lying in there having to actually feel the pain. And that has taught me so much about gratitude and appreciation. And from that, it's, I think, put a fire in my tummy to enable me to achieve some great things. I was lucky enough to play for Australia when I was a young boy playing baseball, moved to America, played over there, went to college, studied sports psychology. There was a lot of struggles along the way. I had my first heart attack when I was 12. I lost my scholarship when I was 18 because of ill health, and that brought me back. I never played baseball again in America, but that got me into the corporate scene, as you know, and I think, again, that just gave me that motivation to not enable other people outside my world to tell me what I could or could not do. And I realize now that no one in our life is ever going to tell us what we can do. They're only going to tell us what we can't, but it's our choice whether we choose to listen. And that sort of progressively rapid through the corporate world. I climbed the banking world. Within 4 years, I had 600 staff and, was catching up with the CEO every second week. And I realized that chasing materialistic wealth and being driven by ego and arrogance took me so far away from what I thought success was going to bring me. And it took me to hit rock bottom in 2010 for everything to change. But for me, that upbringing taught me so much about who I am today and who I want to be tomorrow.
Wow. Well, I certainly haven't had anyone give me a story like that on this podcast before. That's an incredible journey. And goodness, I mean, as you said, so much adversity, but adversity is not what's defined you. And to think that that moment where you just accidentally ran into the doctor's knee and he felt something, and and everything went from there is crazy and unbelievable, and obviously meant to be. All right. I mean, where do I even go from there? Because you just gave us so much.
I tried to pack it all in.
So much. I know. I'm actually going to ask you, I mean, definitely we want to understand. You've said you had so many lessons and going through everything you've gone through has taught you so much. It's interesting that you spoke about ego and possessions and, climbing the corporate ladder, and you obviously did an incredible job of succeeding in that world very, very fast. Some people would think, looking from afar, that speaking requires an ego, that being up on stage in front of everyone's about everyone looking at you. I personally don't have that view, but I'd love to understand, how do you see speaking?
Yeah, if we look back at those, that period of time in the corporate world, I was definitely driven by power, privileges, and possessions. That was my 3 key P's, I think, now that really unfolded me to break and get to rock bottom. And I think that's the greatest place to get to, because that the only place from there is up, obviously.
Yes.
But I think ego, from a point of view from stage presence, I really, I've definitely seen it of others, and I probably started with it. But I think that for me, I've been in this speaking world now for over 15 years, and probably for the first 8 years, I struggled. I was very, very doubtful of being able to make it a career. I was doing, little gigs here and there with kids that didn't want to listen to you, and companies that didn't want to pay you, and audiences that were disconnected and not engaged, and your ego gets wiped out very, very quickly. Yes. I think there's an element of confidence that we must have, no doubt, because we need to get up on stage. But I think that when you get up on stage with this yearning, burning desire to make an impact in the audience's eyes, then everything else goes out the window. I've learned so much about myself on stage. I've learned so much about valuing myself and loving myself and investing in myself, and realizing that not everyone's going to love me. And it's been such a difficult journey. You can have 1,000 people in the room, and 999 of them are zoned in and so connected, and there's one person on their phone, and they're so it disconnects you so much from the audience and so much from your message. You know, if we digress very quickly, and I hope you don't mind, but there was an event. I've never shared this on a podcast before, but
okay.
there was an event. There was an event where there was it was maybe 1,500 people in the room, and there was one lady on a phone down the front. And I'm sure that those that are dialed in, that are speakers, you would have had this experience before. And I was so disconnected. I was getting so frustrated, so much so that I was skipping parts of my presentation just to hurry up and get to the end, because I thought, well, if she's not listening, then no one's listening, right? So just hurry up and get to the end, get off stage, get back to your hotel room, get on the plane, get home to your wife. And then at the end, I'd finished, and I was signing books, and people were coming to get photos, and, you know, that all makes you feel amazing inside. But that one woman that was disconnected was in the line, and I was like, why does she want to buy a book? Like, she wasn't even listening to what I had to say. And then I thought, I know why she wanted to buy a book, to work out what I actually said on stage, right? Because you didn't hear a word that I said. And she gets to the front and she says, oh, I'm so sorry if I impacted your presentation or distracted you whilst you were presenting. I was like, no, not at all. Like, there was an element of sarcasm, right? I was like, no, just show kindness, you know, just stay humble. And she said, you know, I've heard of you before, and I've heard of your story, but I've never heard your story. And I really wanted today to be the day that helped me close the chapter of immense grief that I have felt for so long. And I wanted to hear your tools, and I wanted to hear your strategies, but I just couldn't look at you in the eyes, because I knew if I looked at you in the eyes, I'd break. Because the whole time I was presenting, and she showed me a phone, I was looking at a photo of my 6-year-old daughter who died from the exact same cancer that you died from. And it made me realize so quickly, and I'm sorry I get so emotional, but I'm a man that wears my heart on my sleeve, that everyone's going through something. And how dare we, as a person that is blessed and privileged to be on stage, to be able to share our heart with an audience, make the assumption that people are rude and disconnected, but also make the assumption that we're more important than what they're going through in their life. And it made me realize, with everything I do, whether it's driving to the airport and getting cut off by a car, whether it's somebody at the checkout being rude, or it's somebody in the audience that we perceive as being disconnected or disrespectful, everyone's going through something. And we just can't put words of other people in our minds. We need to put the words of affirmation and positivity in our minds. And, you know, I love that saying, we need to stop listening to ourselves and start talking to ourselves. All I needed to do whilst on stage was starting to tell myself, no, everybody else in this room is so engaged. So lean into those that are engaged. I don't know what's going on with her and her life, but yet it pulls us away. So it was such a great learning curve for me to understand that, you know, there's so much else going on in other people's worlds, and not allowing ego, back to your question, to really consume us whilst we're on stage.
Yes. Wow, what an incredible lesson. I've had similar lessons, not as emotional as that amazing woman. And I'm so glad she came up and spoke to you at the end as well. But you're right, when you're up there on stage, we often rely on the energy we're getting back from the audience and reading the body language, I guess, and, you know, whether someone's looking at you and the smiles and all the rest of it. And sometimes what we perceive that communication to be is actually not what's happening at all. So there's two things. As you said, you've got to have enough confidence and be grounded enough in yourself to continue on, even if you're getting signals that you feel aren't right or that are potentially negative. And it is interesting to discover what is actually going on afterwards. I'll always remember one of my talks. There was this man in the front row, and he had this look on his face. And as I was talking, it was like I had an out-of-body experience, because I kept talking. At the same time, what I'm thinking is, what am I saying that is causing that face? Because he was looking at me like this. And for anyone that's just listening and not watching us, I apologise, but I've got a very strange look on my face. And We had a break in the talk I was doing, and I went up to him in the break and I said, "Oh, how are you enjoying the talk?" And he said, "It's very interesting." And again, for those that are just listening, I just made exactly the same face while I said it's very interesting. So that was his concentration face. For me, it was, what on earth are you saying? That doesn't make any sense. Are you stupid? All of those things that you might be thinking about yourself at the time. But for him, he was really interested and he was just concentrating really hard. So as you said, you just never know what is going on. I've had others that were doing similar things, and in a break, they've said to me, "I'm really sorry," because I've done a few things to try and get them back in as well, in the smaller group scenarios. And this one particular lady came up to me and she said, "I know that you were trying to get me back in. I'm really sorry, but my mum is in hospital, and if I get a call, I have to just exit the room straight away." And I thought, oh my goodness, yes, of course you can. Like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I was working so hard to get you back in, because I was annoyed that you weren't listening to me. Yeah. And now that I know that your mum's in hospital, of course, like, why are you even here? You can leave if you want to. You don't have to listen to me. So yes, what a lesson, and so important for speakers, because we do rely so heavily sometimes on the energy from the audience. If we digress for a second, I'd be interested to know, because one of the biggest questions I get, because I still coach clients as well in speaking, as well as speaking myself, and it's when they have to do a virtual talk and nobody has their cameras on, and you're just speaking to a camera, and it's like, how am I supposed to keep going? How am I supposed to read the room? How am I supposed to have any energy? Have you ever had to deal with that, Michael, and what are your tips there?
Oh yeah, I love that. It's so funny because I had a client here 3 days ago doing the exact same thing, delving into assisting her in being able to find the energy from within as opposed to source the energy outside of us from an audience perspective. And I think, like, for me, sort of 2017 was when things started to really ramp up for me. I was, as you know, lucky enough to tour with the Dalai Lama and Richard Branson, and then the Robbins stuff happened. 2020 was meant to go crazy, and then all of a sudden COVID hit and everything changed. And I went from doing 100 plus events in 20 odd countries around the world to my wife and I were in complete lockdown with my immune system and my health. I couldn't go out. I couldn't go to a cafe, let alone on stage. So everything went on. And then I got the emails from the bureaus telling me that all your events have been canceled. We had 68 events get canceled in 1 week. And I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? This is torture. And then all of a sudden I get an email from some random company that wants to do something online. And then it gets bigger and bigger. And then, as you would know, just exploded. And I was like, how and then you tell a joke, because I try and ride the wave, as I'm sure many speakers do. You want to have my story. There's a lot of raw emotion and there's a lot of tears, but there's also a lot of laughter as well. And you tell a funny joke and then you pause and you hope to God they're listening. You don't even know if anybody's dialed in yet. You've still got to just give it to them. So for me, the only tip that I can give them is, or two things for me, is one, you got to believe in your message. You just got to back yourself. Yes. But the second one for me is, like, set the intention before you go on stage. That's one thing that I always do in the green room before I go out, is what's my one word that I'm going to subconsciously lean on when I'm at that moment of deficit, when I'm in that moment of doubt. So it could be energy. It could be engagement, it could be excitement, it could be fun, it could be interactive, whatever that word may be that you feel is going to lift your spirit in times of doubt. That for me was huge during COVID. And now, even, like, I just hosted a 3-day conference and did a keynote and a workshop, and then emceed the gala dinner and did a Q&A with a lot of the Australian swimming Olympians. And I knew that I was going to be tired on Saturday night during that gala dinner. So when I was in the room ready to go out, I just set my intention of energy. Like, I needed to make sure that my energy was up. And we all can feel it, especially when we're on stage. We know when we're starting to dip and lag a little bit. Yes. And for me, it's just that little internal conversation that I have going, hey, you committed to energy. It's time to lift the spirit. So back to your question, I think for me, it's to back yourself and set that intention to be able to lift the spirits when the doubt sneaks in.
Yes, love that. So true. And I'm interested, when you are doing a live keynote, energy is so important. Do you have any rituals? Is there any particular way, for instance, that you warm yourself up, or do you find yourself going into quiet mode and conserving your energy before you're about to be on stage. How does it work for you?
Yeah, so I have two different approaches depending on the audience size, and maybe we can bounce off that next.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
when the room is small, I want to walk out really calm
Okay. Yeah.
and really connected. When the room is massive, I want to walk out and match the energy in the room as well. So for me, like, I always exercise before I go on stage in the green room. So I get to the event about an hour beforehand, always make sure that sound check and all that's done, and then give myself an hour. So I have 50 by 5. So they're I do 50 push-ups, star jumps, sit-ups, dips, and squats. So that's my get in the zone, get the endorphins, get the dopamine flowing.
Yes.
And then I meditate. I'm a man of faith, so I pray at the end. And then before I go out, it's either a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 or a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I want to calm down, it's in for 5, out for 10, in for 4, out for 8, all the way down to in for 1, out for 2. So that just slows my heart rate down, gets me very calm and in control. Whereas if I need to ramp it up a little bit, I do it the other way. So I in for 1, out for 2, and work my way up and finish with in for 5, out for 10. Then I'm ready to rock and roll. So it's all dependent on audience size, but that is my non-negotiable routine for every event. There's been times where I've, the flight's delayed, as I'm sure many have had challenges, traffic, what have you, and I'm doing it in the car. Hard to do push-ups, sit-ups, dips, squats.
It is.
That in the back of an Uber or whatever, but there's always something you can do,
Wonderful. I love that. And it's so important to warm up. Any athlete, and you've been an athlete as well, would warm up before they're about to go into the game. And as a speaker, you need to think of yourself the same. A speaker, an actor, anyone that's on stage, if you just go out cold, then you're warming up during your presentation or performance. If you warm up before you go out there, then you're ready to go from the start. And I call it start with a bang, like let's start. And I love that you've got two different ways that you do that depending on the size of the audience and matching the energy in the room, because I'll often say to clients, because they'll ask about, how big do I have to be or something like that. And I'll say, well, it really depends where you are. If you're in a boardroom with 10 people, you're going to look a bit insane doing what I would tell you to do if you're on stage in front of 15,000. And vice versa, if you did what you would do in the boardroom in front of 10 people on stage in front of 15,000, you'd be so boring and dead that nothing would happen. So tell us about, for you, I know you've had the pleasure and the experience of speaking in front of so many different sized audiences. Do you want to talk us through maybe some of the talks that you remember and some of the audience sizes and how that's affected you? And potentially how it changes the way that you deliver when you're on stage?
I think the best an example from one extreme to another is that I did a gig at the MGM Grand on a Thursday morning. Okay. And then I spoke in a boardroom for a sporting club, an NRL sporting club, on the Saturday lunchtime. 2 days later. Okay. So I flew over on the Wednesday, landed Wednesday morning into LA, flew to Vegas, got in mid-afternoon, went to my room, had a shower, went down to the venue, did sound check that evening, which, this had over 15,000 people there and the stadium was empty. So it was quite daunting when you walk into a room that's empty, right? And so I was doing sound check and went back to my room and did everything I could to fall asleep because, it was just, the heart was beating. I was excited. I was energized. I was ready to go. Had somewhat of a sleep. And then, again, routine, get up early, exercise, meditate, all that sort of stuff before I go to the venue. And, I remember there was a speaker before me the day before, and then I was the speaker day 2. And he had his entourage. He's very, very famous in America. He had, I think he said his entourage was 15 now. He had the private jet. He had everything, right? Yes. He had the green M&Ms in his room because that's what he wanted. I had 2 bananas and a water because that's all I needed. There's no ego with me. So I remember walking out and just hearing that roar and that crowd, and then hearing your pump up intro, and in America, like you do in here in Australia, you do everything you can, and you deliver every part of your heart and your soul, and you get a standing ovation, and every part of your body just explodes, and you think that this is the coolest thing in the world. In America, they introduce you and you walk out, and you get a standing ovation on the walkout, and you're like, "Whoa,
Wow.
what are you doing? Sit down. Whoa, I haven't done anything
Where do
yet.
I
Like,
go from
calm down.
here?
Let me actually contribute."
Yeah.
You've all peaked way too early. So for me, that is exciting, that is enjoyable, that is fun, and to a certain degree, when you know your message and you know your audience, that's easy. Like that's you don't really see any eyes. You have no distractions because you can't see anybody.
Yes.
And the stadium's so big that if you tell a joke and 10% of the room laugh, that's 1,500 people laughing. That's going to influence another 10%. So now you got 3,000 people laughing. If you tell a joke in a boardroom that has 12 people in it and 10% laugh, you can do the sum. So it's much easier in that world, right? So then I finished on Thursday afternoon. It was amazing, 2.5 hours of book signings and photos, and then they take you to the hotel lobby, and you get in the car and they drive you back to the airport. And then I flew home Thursday night, got into Sydney at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, went to a hotel, had to sleep for 3 hours, and then went straight to this boardroom, and I was wrecked. And I suggest don't ever do that, but it was, it was at that moment where things are crazy and you just do your best and say yes to everything.
Yes.
And I remember walking into the boardroom and like I just left a stadium and my energy was so high, and I walked in and every part of me wanted to say, "Good morning, Sydney!" And I would have, like you said, I would have like an idiot.
Yes.
And I walked in and I was so nervous. Like there's like 24 eyeballs staring at you, and the half of them have got their arms folded, and you think they're so, are they connected, are they disconnected? Your little brain starts to tell you all these things. You're tired and you're full of doubt, and then you share a jovial, authentic joke and tell them how you're feeling openly and honestly, and you disarm the room immediately. And now you've got them in the palm of your hand and you're connected, and you just hope to God they stay with you for the hour, So it's amazing. To your point, like I never have really sat back and reflected on the differences and the tonality and the volume and the engagement and the interaction and the connection between one event and another. And to your point, if you take the same energy into a stadium from a boardroom or vice versa, there's going to be a huge disconnect. So to know your audience, but to really enjoy it at the end of the day, I had this goal to walk away from the corporate world in 2010 when I got really, really sick again. I got bacterial meningitis, I got fluid on the brain, I had Bell's palsy, and I just said, what, enough's enough. I've got to stop chasing materialistic wealth and just start chasing impact. And that's when, as and many others know, that's when my wife and I opened an orphanage and a school overseas. And for me, that was my first step in serving other people, was to just find people that could never return the favor. And I guess very similar to speaking, you're up on stage because you want to make an impact in one person's life, not the whole audience. And if you get a chance to impact the whole audience, that's amazing. But remember, like you're going to share your heart and your soul, and you may not get any feedback. You may not get one message, but you just need a hope in your heart that the message intended was the message received.
Yes. And it's sure this would have happened to you as well. Sometimes you don't get the instant feedback. It's not instant gratification. But down the track, someone reaches out to you and sends you this email out of the blue and says, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know I saw you speak 5 years ago and really had a huge impact, and I've done X, Y, Z since then." And you think, wow, oh goodness, I remember that talk and I thought it was terrible, or I thought this happened, or I thought that happened, and I didn't think anyone was engaged. And then you get something like that. So sometimes, as you said, you just need to stay true to your message. You need to make sure you give everything possible to the audience. I see it as giving. I don't see it as being egotistical when you're up there. I see it as giving to your audience. And when you come from that point of view and you just put it all out there, then you don't even know who you're impacting or how you're impacting them many times, because not everybody is ready or willing or wanting to come up and actually give you that feedback straight away.
And I think also, to your point, you don't know what flow on can occur from what event. Like the event that changed my life was a charity event on the Gold Coast that opened up the door to an amazing event in Sydney.
Okay.
And if I just showed up at that charity event on the Gold Coast, not knowing who was in the room, not caring who was really in the room, and not understanding what it could potentially lead to,
yes,
then there's no way honestly, there is no way in the world I'd be speaking to you today. There's no way in the world that my speaking career would have took the trajectory that it did from that event, that, TV stuff. Like I off the back of that event with the Dalai Lama stuff in America, then I was on MTV's show Ridiculousness, and then I got a gig on Fox Sports, and then I was on iFish, and it all stemmed off the back of doing my routine, warming up, making sure that the first 30 seconds, first 2 minutes on stage were powerful and punchy because I was warmed up and I was ready to go.
yes.
That eventually led to where I am. And I think that comes back as well to like chasing impact, not income. Because I think a lot of people go, oh, I'm getting paid this amount of money for this gig. I really want to knock it out of the park and give them what they deserve. I don't know what I get paid for gigs. My team sort that out.
Okay.
Because I want to make sure that whether they're paying me a stupid amount of money because of X, Y, and Z and we're doing this, or it's a charity event and I'm doing it for next to nothing or for free, I still want to give the best performance that I possibly can. And I think when we have that approach and that attitude towards it, then, I think that's when we can really make sure that the whole message and the real you is demonstrated and shown.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. So you've mentioned a couple of times that you've spoken on stage with the Dalai Lama and Richard Branson. I'm sure the listeners would love to hear more about that. How was that experience? And did you learn anything from watching Richard or the Dalai Lama?
So I was with Richard. Dalai Lama I wasn't with at the same time.
Okay.
It's one of those, as you would know, a staggered event.
Right.
But
yep.
the Branson tour was really interesting for me. And I say this with sincerity but mindfulness. Often we strive to admire the traits in other people that we want to implement in our lives, but rarely do we reflect on the traits that we do not admire in others, so to ensure that we do not implement those traits in our life.
Yes, true.
So I really make sure that I identify things that I would not necessarily implement in my keynote. I would not necessarily behave that way through my presentation. And Richard Branson, amazing. What a man, what a story, what a delivery, what a way to communicate. I was on with a few other speakers from different parts of the world, and it was nice to identify what I would not put in my world. Like
Yes.
I'm not a sales guy.
Okay.
That's not me. I don't try and flog things. I don't try and sell things. I don't try and push things.
Yes.
But I learnt from Richard grace.
Okay.
I learnt patience. But I think the most important thing that I learned from him is that you need to protect your own time. He's very protective of his world and his life. And you know what? You finish an event and, excuse me, my wife and I were in Melbourne a couple of months ago. I was fortunate enough to do a talk at the convention centre. I think there was about 4,000 people there. And post the event, we did book signings and photos, and it would have been at least 2.5 hours.
Yeah, wow.
And my wife was tapped, and she's like, I'm done. I'm going back to the room. You do you. And
Yes.
she went back. And I remember thinking about, he allocates a specific amount of time, and that's it. Whether there's 50 people or 500 people and no one in the line, he's done. And I know I'm never going to be at that level, but it's not the level that I'm focused on. It's the intention around protection of energy and giving of yourself, because you give your heart and your soul on stage.
Yes.
And then whether you like it or not, you give even more when people come and share their problems with you and their stories and their challenges and their pain and their loss and their suffering and their connection between what you were sharing and what they're going through. So for me, that was a really valuable lesson for me. I'm like, I need to know what I can and can't deliver and how much time I have left in the tank, because if my tank's empty and I've got nothing to give to my wife, then why am I doing what I'm doing?
So true. And especially with what you're speaking on, you would get a lot put on you if you took it on in terms of what people were telling you about, which is exhausting. And I mean, it's nice that you can do it, but you're right. You do need to protect your time and yourself and have enough energy for the people that are really special to you in your life. And I think those that don't speak at all would be surprised, I would say. And those of you who do speak that are listening will know how much energy you expend up on that stage. You might speak for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40, 45. It's a lot. It's a lot of energy that you expend, and then to go into the book signing afterwards and have to keep that level of energy and engagement with multiple people. And as you said, sometimes that's even more draining because it's every single story that you're hearing and listening to and trying to process. I know for me, I'm as a performer, because my background is acting and I was in corporate for 18 years. So corporate and acting have come together into my business now. But from an acting perspective, I would always get fairly quiet before a show. And I never realized why, because I was acting from when I was 8 years old. But on reflection now as an adult, I realized I was saving my energy ready for the stage, because as soon as I was on, it was bang, I was on. The energy was there. And then afterwards, when no one's watching, as soon as I'm off stage, I'd go straight back down. And even if I think about exiting from a theatre acting point of view, not a speaking point of view, exiting off stage between scenes, I'd do exactly the same thing. I would be on until that second that no one could see me and I knew I was well into the wings, and then straight back down again and then ready to go back on. So, it is interesting, the energy. And I love that. I've read a book. You may have read it too, Dan Martell's Buy Back Your Time. Have you ever heard of that book? It's a great book, but he talks about how to buy back your time in business, and as you said, your team look after the bookings, you don't look after that, so that would be an example of buying back your time. And he spent some time with Richard Branson as well, and that was one of the things that he noticed was that he had an hour every day with his EA, and he had no link to emails at all. Everything went through her, and they had a system. They had a system where she would report to him every day, and then he would give his feedback or advice or whatever, and then everything would happen from there. So, yes, I think he definitely is into protecting his time. Yeah. And I love that you've learnt what you wouldn't do. It's not necessarily a don't do this, but it's what you wouldn't want to do when you're up on stage. And you mentioned selling. I wonder if part of that is also cultural, because I think in Australia we're very laid back in comparison to, if I'm talking in general, to the US, and we're not taught to sell ourselves. We're taught to be humble. We have a bit of the tall poppy syndrome going on here, whereas in the US, I think from a child you're taught to sell yourself and put yourself out there and be proud of your achievements in a more public way than we ever have been taught to be here. Have you seen that? And do you think
Massive.
that speakers in the US...
Even your intro's got to be different over there.
Okay, tell us about that.
Pump your tires up. You need to pump your tires up over there. It's all ego in your intro over there. Because if you don't pump your tires up, then they won't listen. Yes. And you need to hook them big time. So for me, it's this, again, knowing your audience, knowing your geography, knowing where you are and who you're with is so important, because they love that. And perfect example is... doing that ridiculousness show, all the kids would know it, not us people that are in our different age category. That's me being polite about not knowing where we sit on that age group. So,
don't worry, I'm definitely not in that age group. I don't know the show. I know MTV. I think that show's my age, but I don't know the show you're talking about.
I went on, and then it was crazy. It was a wild show. It was a lot of fun. It's all laughter and giggles, and there's the guy from DC Shoes and a rapper, and before me was Justin Bieber, and then there was Jerry Springer, and then they must have had an empty time slot, and I just happened to walk past and they hooked me in. But I was walking down a couple of days after the show, and someone from America obviously had seen the show, and he's like, "Hey man, I saw you on Ridiculous. Oh, it was so funny. It was great episode. High five. Great to meet you, man. Rah, rah. I come home and I'm walking down my main street of Sawtell, and I saw a guy I went to school with, and he's like, "Oh, Mr. MTV, Mr. Big Shot, too cool for us locals."
Yes.
And then he didn't follow it up with, "Hey man, how are you? Nice to see you." That was it. That was the end of the conversation. And I was like, we strive in Australia to knock people down that are doing well.
Yes, it's terrible.
And in America, they are just so joyous of people's success.
Yes. Yes, and we need to shift that and move on from that. Absolutely. And I love that you said you had to change your opening and your bio in America compared to here. There's a colleague of mine who worked at a very senior level in corporate in the US, and at one stage she had her boss say to her, "Look, I don't know what this Australian thing is you've got going on, but just stop it. You need to start selling yourself." Because she was doing the humble thing that we all do. "Oh, no, it wasn't me. It was the team." And it's just like, no, just cut it out. Stop it. You're not doing yourself any favours.
Pump your own tyres up. Otherwise, we won't pump yours up.
Exactly. All right. This has been such a good conversation. I would love to know from a speaking business point of view. So, again, from a distance, it can look like, I'd love to be a speaker. They just get on stage for 40 minutes and they make lots and lots of money. And speaker fees, I mean, Australia is different. Again, in the US, it's quite easy to get 10K if you're a good speaker, USD, and all the way up to 100K is very reasonable. Over there, I think the fees are less here in terms of what you can attract. You can certainly attract 10K, but as soon as you're getting up to 25, 30, 50, it's less heard of here, in my experience. You've spoken in many countries, so how do you see the Australian market versus, say, Europe versus the US and potentially other parts of Asia or the Middle East? What are your experience in terms of speaking fees and what you can command?
Yeah, I think that America is probably the space where you can get the largest amount of funding. And I guess, again, population, audience size, and demand. They want you. The only challenge from a speaking perspective for Australians is the add-on travel.
Yes.
If you're, used to turning left on a plane, you're going to throw an extra $10,000 to $15,000 on your fee before you get over there. But what I think is interesting, excuse me, is the fact that if you were to tell an American that you're getting, I don't know, your speaker fee over there is $5,000 or $10,000, they probably won't book you because they will think, "Oh,
you're not good enough."
Okay.
Yeah.
They mustn't be very good,
Yes.
So sometimes price demands almost identifies you as a talent, but you need to make sure that you have the credibility behind it.
Absolutely.
And you don't outprice yourself, because if you outprice yourself with no credentials, then your name will get wiped. But what I think is important as well is you need to identify how many you want to do and how much you want to make from that with the credibility and runs on the board. Because, I guess I'm at a point now where I'm like, you know what, if I don't want to be doing 15 to 20 events over there a year and spend all my time on planes and being away from my family. So you outprice yourself, and then you pick up 3 or 4 events a year, and you're like, okay, that's fine. I'm happy to do that. I don't want to be over there all the time.
Yeah.
So, but I think, again, in Australia, obviously the price point is significantly different. Asia is very different as well. A lot of the European and Asian countries, you charge them in USD anyway.
Yes.
So sometimes
where would you
pick up a nice
say
little margin there.
Asia and Europe sit in comparison to Australia and the US?
Still significantly higher than Australia, but definitely lower than the US market.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my experience anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's good to understand from lots of different speakers who obviously come onto the show what their experience is when you're wanting to make a business out of speaking. And the other ways to make a business out of speaking is through selling from stage or leading people to another service. Do you do any of that, or it's purely your speaker fees that drive your speaking business?
So I have a book that is has done very, very well, but we donate all the profits from that to charity. We don't take any money from the book at all to charity. We either donate the funds to the organisation that the events are associated with, or as I briefly mentioned earlier, we were told we couldn't have kids from all the drugs that I had as a little boy, and we now have an orphanage overseas. We have 44 kids that we look after over there, and we also have a school with 270 kids. So all the money goes to that. I've got some online coaching programs. I don't talk about it. It's just on my website, and if people find it, they find it. All that money also goes to charity as well. And I think from an engagement point of view and a relationship building point of view, from a speaker's business perspective, when people identify that you're going in there purely to make an impact, yes, they're paying you a substantial amount of money to be there, but then you're not trying to make more money from selling books, and you're actually wanting to truly make an impact from those books. For me, I think that's a really beautiful way of showing human connection. And I get it. I get that a lot of speakers sell books and they make lots of money from their books, and that's cool. I think that I've had a really, really good run from a speaking point of view, and I've just always had that desire that if I can give money back from, something that people can take home, then that's a really great blessing from me. But I also think that if that's something that you want to do, you want to sell something, I think that you need to nail that. Okay. As well as you nail your keynote, because you can deliver 45 minutes of absolute quality and engagement and energy and joy and laughter and love and vulnerability, and you can blow it all out the window with a 3-minute pitch at the end trying to flog off a product. Yes. Whereas if you get up there and you just share your heart and your soul, and then there's a opportunity if you were interested in, I know I'm sure you tell them all exactly the same thing, but I just think that it can really derail, and I know very well speakers that I've worked with all around the world, and we've worked intensely on this, where they have been at an event where it is a sales pitch and they feel forced to sell, and it's derailed their brand and it's tarnished their reputation, and people no longer book them because they have tried to flow in that sell pitch program, and it can really impact you. Okay. So I just think that yes, there's a space for it, but there's also a delivery on how to do it as well. If you want longevity in the marketplace, be really mindful of your pitch. Yes. There's good and bad ways to sell in any business, exactly. and I think it's an art to be able to sell from stage, and completely different to selling behind a counter in a shop because someone's come in to buy something in that instance. Completely agree. So let's move to what's next in the speaking industry. So if we want to move beyond the keynote, before we started our official conversation today, I mentioned that at Illuminated Story, we help people blend traditional keynote speaking with theatrical elements to really elevate the experience the audience is getting. So that's how we're moving beyond the keynote, or beyond the standard keynote. Have you seen anything on your travels? Have you trialed anything yourself that continues to take your keynote to another level? Again, I think it's audience and location, but yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of different senses that we have the ability to connect with from a stage point of view, which I'm sure you would share and teach and upskill those on. But when you're standing on stage and you have nothing behind you, then there's that real human connection. When you have good slide deck, then there's the connection between you and the slide, and then back to you. When there's you speaking and a slide and potentially a video then again, it changes the senses and it keeps them engaged and it allows them to be less distracted because there's more things that are happening and they can watch that. When there's you speaking and there's your slide deck and there's the video and then potentially there's some undercurrent audio at a specific spot in your presentation that might demonstrate some vulnerability or emotion, then that also elevates beyond the keynote. However, if you do that in a boardroom, or you do that with,
Yes.
or you do that with a few hundred people in the room, it may not land as well.
Yes. Yeah.
I know that when I'm in America, they love that. They want it. They crave it. They want to feel all the goosebumps and the tingles.
Yes.
You do that in Australia, and your feedback might be a little bit too Americanized for me, which I've heard. So it's been nice to be able to just shape it and work it in. When you have a really big audience,
Yes.
I definitely love that audio theme track to be able to simmer underneath, which bubbles the emotions right at the end of the presentation, which erupts hopefully the audience at the end.
Yeah.
But just to try and get that balance and that different types of connection has been a really great blessing for me.
Yeah. And so is that something you've done in big audience settings or something you'd like to try in the future?
Oh no, definitely. I've been doing that for many years now, and that in big audiences it works amazingly well. I obviously have the slide deck and the videos, which obviously culminate in sharing the story and the messaging. And it's really nice sometimes, like if I've got time in a keynote, I'll play a 4 or 5 minute documentary of my time in Haiti where we introduce a boy to his mum who hasn't seen her for 8 years because she thought that he died. There's, as you know, we were very blessed with a beautiful little baby boy back in 2017 after being told we couldn't have kids, and he arrived 10 weeks plus early, and then they told us he had sepsis and we had to prepare his funeral. And I got to walk a day or several months in my mum's shoes, and I got to feel what true brokenness was. But then I got a chance to take him home as well, and now he's a healthy, beautiful little boy. And for me to be able to every now and then share a snippet of his story and his journey and the real battles that people face every day away from the corporate world or the perceived first world problems that we face, I think is really beautiful for people to be able to connect with. But you also need to be really careful because a lot of people in the audience have walked that path and didn't get to take their child home.
Yes.
So it's this real balance of allowing people to get really connected with your message, but not to break them at the same time.
Yes, I think, psychological safety is now such a big topic in general and in corporates, and it's an interesting topic in keynote speaking because often the speaker has a very emotional story to share with the audience, and you do have to be careful, probably more so now than ever before, about how you communicate that and how you bring people back out of those deep emotions. How do you balance that in your talks?
That's a really great question. I literally 4 weeks ago had a guy come and stay for 2 days. We did a 2-day deep intensive speaker training, and his story, is probably the most heartbreaking and the most horrific story I've ever heard in my life. And when we went through his messaging and the story itself, I was like, I had to take a point of view from somebody that is genuinely wanting to take care of him, but also take care of his audiences as well. And there's some things you just cannot share.
Yeah.
Like there are things that when you are, you just can't. And if you do need to share it, you need to share it in a way that is emotionally disconnected. Because if you are emotionally connected and you share the story, it's going to break people. So you just can't do it. So for me, it's that real balance between the two. But also, I think for me, a well-timed and tasteful, joyous comment or joke that's relevant to lift them back up is really, really powerful. And I make sure that the end of my session is very much like this. But there are moments where you can get people to the edge of emotion, and then you just perfectly time something that's going to lift the spirits, and then straight away you bring them back in the room. So I always try and start high, then we have the ups and downs as we all do, but then we, as you said, we finish so that they walk out of the room feeling like they could walk through a brick wall, but also they've had that emotion to self-reflect and maybe want to make the phone call to say, hey, I love you and I care about you, and thanks for all the things that you have done and all the things that I take for granted.
Great advice, and humour is such a great tool to use to bring people back out of that very emotional state. One of my clients at the moment has a very tragic story that we're working on telling. We're doing something quite unique though. We're opening her in an off-Broadway theatre in New York next year in March, and we're actually going to warn the audience prior. We're calling it the R-rated keynote. And we're going to actually give them a warning beforehand to make sure that they feel ready to come in so that she can tell her story, because it's very important to her to tell her story. Although I would say that she's able to tell it in a more emotionally disconnected way, and that the story is still pretty horrific. So we still feel that we need to give some sort of warning prior to people coming in.
Interesting.
So that'll be a really interesting one. And we're lucky because we get the full gamut of what a theatre can give us in terms of, as you said, the sound and lighting as well in that instance, because darkness and light and playing with that can make a huge difference to the feeling and the mood in the auditorium. Beautiful. All right. What about AI? Do you think how do you think AI could help or hinder when it comes to keynote speaking, elevating, moving forward?
Well, my good man who's coming to visit me in 2 days' time, he's the AI guru speaker.
Okay.
But for me, I'm so out of the loop when it comes to tech. I'm not that guy. My wife had to help me set all this up to make it work today.
I love it. She's done a good job.
I think people, the more AI takes over, in my opinion, the more audiences are going to want real, genuine stories with real, genuine connection that are completely disconnected from tech.
Yes.
I think people just want to know that there is still love, and there is still life, and there is still joy, and there's still kindness, and there's still compassion and empathy in the world, not just everything tech generated. Yes, I'm sure it's going to help you create your slide decks, and yes, it may help you connect with doing your blogs or making your topics more powerful and more meaningful. But at the end of the day, like you said, it's all about delivery. And for me, I think that human connection is going to be the key, not the AI taking over.
So true. All right, final question. Let's end on the funny thing. You bring humour into your keynotes. Were you always just naturally funny, or did you have to work on how to be funny, how to bring humour into your keynotes?
Man, I was like a loner at school. I went from 22 kids in a primary school to 1,200 kids at high school. I walked the hallways by myself. I sat in the libraries reading. I didn't even read. I just looked at pictures in books, until I got chased. I still remember I got chased by a beautiful Down syndrome girl running through the hallway, and a guy grabbed me and hid me under his school bag. And then, 25, what's that? Oh, a bit longer than that now, nearly 30 years later, I'm still mates with him, just amazing how it happened. But no, I think that practicing is great. I think throwing things out there off cuff. I think I've always been pretty quick-witted, and I identify areas that you can just throw things in and see if it works and lands. And then re-looping like comedians do. You start with something at the beginning, especially if you incorporate an audience, and then you bring them back in a few times throughout it. But no, I don't think that I'm, maybe ask my wife, maybe she thinks I'm funny, but I don't think she does. But I think that just practicing that craft and having somebody that's going to be honest.
Yes.
Like I take my mates with me and they listen to me speak and they're like, man, you crushed that. That was amazing. That was the best one you've ever done. That was awesome. Let's go get a drink, you know? And my wife will come and she'll be like, oh, not your best.
Yeah.
That was definitely not your best, you know? And you
Yes.
need that. You need that one person in your corner that's going to kick you when you need to be kicked and be honest with you and to help you want to get better. But more importantly than that, you need to want to listen and want to get better as well. So practice, practice, practice and find that one or two real good ones that makes everybody laugh and keep churning it out.
Keep it on repeat. Love that.
Yeah.
And love the rehearse, rehearse, rehearse message that goes for the whole keynote. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Amazing speakers are not amazing just because they jumped on stage and saying the first thing that comes off the top of their head. They have actually crafted it and rehearsed it and developed it over time. And it doesn't mean that sometimes new things come out and that spontaneous things can happen. I find that the best, most spontaneous things can happen when you're so rehearsed that you're not worried about what's coming next because you just know it. And then you can respond to the audience and you can mix it up because you know how you're going to get back on track.
Yeah.
Have you found the same thing, Michael?
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. When you know your message, you know what's next, and then you can go completely off cuff because someone's phone rang.
Yes.
You know, like I remember I was in this moment of like barely keeping it together.
Uh-huh.
You know, and I was so emotional sharing my mum's little message about, you know, the doctors were speaking to her and she said, as the phone rang and like the phone rang in the room and I was like, and you know, my mom, she looked into the doctor and she just said, Doc, can you just make sure your phone's on silent? You know, like everyone roared out laughing, like it was just perfect. And now you're like, can someone's phone please ring at that time?
Yes.
It's a great way to break it, you know? So yeah, absolutely. Know your message. But again, you know, I'm mindful of time, but I just think that there are some amazing people in the world that have incredible stories that don't know how to deliver it.
Yes.
And they don't make it. And then there are others, which I'm sure you have seen like I have, that have just this blimp on the radar story. But because they've been well crafted and because they know some people, all of a sudden it explodes. And I just think that it's so important that just because you're not a gold medalist, just because you're not a famous TV star or a superstar or a hero, you know, like me, I'm just an ordinary bloke. I don't have any of that behind me. I'm just a bloke that has a message that I worked really, really hard on crafting it and not quitting when the world basically said, just go back to banking, go back to the corporate world. And I just kept grinding. And then all of a sudden a few doors opened up and, you know, I still don't think I've made it. I still think that I'm just still crafting my skill every day. And I just hope and pray every day that, like I said earlier, the message intended is the message received.
Yes. And I think when you're passionate about what you do and you're that, I call it an A player, you never think you're done. There is always more to do. So
That's right.
Not surprised at all with what you said. I will let you go in a minute. Just one more thing, which I actually think is very challenging. And I have spoken again to many clients about the fact that you've got to be ready. If you're going to tell a really emotional story on stage, you've got to be ready in yourself, because you can get a bit emotional like you have through the podcast even today. If you get so emotional though that you can't even talk, then that's not going to work when you're up there. So you've got huge emotional stories that you're talking about. How do you help yourself? You know, you're on the edge, obviously there's a few tears, but you can continue to move through and talk through it. Are there any tips you've got on that?
Yeah, sometimes if they're too much, you don't share them. Like you said, you just have to leave them out. And there are some days where I've got on stage and I'm emotional and I've got stuff going on at home, or I've got stuff going on with my mom, or, you know, my beautiful kids are unwell, and it's just, and I don't have the strength to share depth of darkness or that depth of pain.
Yes.
So I make sure I don't. But there's also times where I'm on that teetering edge, and I try and find the guy in the audience that you were sharing about before that had the stink face.
Yes.
And when I get to that broken moment, I see stink face, and I go, oh, there he is. Oh, okay. And that just pulls me out of the moment of sadness.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, geez, I hope my face doesn't look like that, and then I just get through the message a little easier. So sometimes we need to find the person in the audience that helps break our emotion.
Yes.
And there's others that we need to find in the audience that help our emotion. To get those two balances right is great.
So good. I think that's an amazing note to finish on. Michael, that has been incredible. Thank you for such a great conversation and all of the gold that you've just shared with our audience today. Have an amazing day, and I look forward to staying in touch and keeping connected.
You bet. Bless you. Take care.
All right. Bye. All right. Here's where you're standing. You can close this episode, think that was fun, and go back to doing things the way you've always done them. Or you can decide you're done being the speaker, the leader that people politely applaud and immediately forget. If you want to create the kind of moments we talked about today, the theatrical, the unforgettable, the profitable, I've put together something that'll change how you think about the stage forever. It's called Beyond the Keynote, Creating Your Illuminated Story. No fluff, no theory, just methodology I use with elite speakers and leaders who are done playing small. Go to illuminatedstory.com/masterclass. And hey, if this episode hit you somewhere, share it, leave a review. It takes 30 seconds and helps more people discover that great speaking isn't magic. It's a game, and you can learn to win it. I'm Carmen Sederino. Don't just speak, illuminate. See you next week.